Hello there, and welcome back to the AgostinhoZinga show with me, your host, AgostinhoZinga, and this is episode number 441. That's 441 of the AgostinhoZinga show. How you doing? How you feeling? Great, amazing, good to know. If it's your first time checking out the show via YouTube, you know what to do. Make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, leave me a comment down below. That'll be more than appreciated. If you're listening via the podcast app, a 5-star review would be greatly appreciated too. And support via Patreon. You can click the link in the show note description at patreon.com/Agostinho. That's patreon.com/Agostinho. I do 2 bonus shows on there per week. So check out, get involved in there for some X-rated, risque opinions on some stuff that I probably won't want to talk about on the main show. So make sure you jump on there at patreon.com/Agostinho. That's patreon.com/Agostinho for as little as $1, the equivalent of $1 and up, for you to listen to the entire archive as well as 2 bonus episodes per week. So make sure you jump on there, get involved today. So what's the vibe? How are you feeling? I hope you're okay wherever you may be. Head is still above water, still doing the things that you need to do in order to keep yourself sane and together and, optimistic and all that sort of malarkey. Things are kicking off here in the UK over the weekend. What do we have? We had United getting knocked out of the FA Cup. We had people in London protesting about the lockdown that's going to end in a couple of weeks. We had people in Bristol protesting about a bill that's going to prevent them from protesting. We had people breaking up, people getting back together. Miami's on fire. Germany's on fire, half of Europe's on fire, everything is going off, things are happening, dominoes are falling, and it feels like, in my opinion, life is getting back to some semblance of normality. It does feel like it. Whenever there's a bit of nonsense out there and you're having to cover nonsense topics and you're having to pay attention to stuff you probably don't want to pay attention to, like, do you really want to know how Kylie Jenner spends her money? Do you really care about who she pays the bills off? Really? You don't really, do you? You don't really care about Kanye and Kim's divorce either, but you're having to care because we have nothing else to look forward to. But when they slowly, those sorts of news start permeating culture, in my opinion, it's usually a sign that things are going back to normal. Whenever you start to hear nonsense stuff, because before, if you remember last year, we were all trying to pretend we were into politics, weren't we? We were all trying to change the world. We were all trying to get rid of racism, rid the world of police brutality, right? And now look at us. We've all turned into quasi-relationship experts. We all know everything people should do with their lives except our own. So I think that is a clear sign that life is returning back to some semblance of normality, and I can't wait. Because the last thing I want to be doing is lending my opinion on flipping socioeconomic laws around the UK, let alone in Europe, and let alone in the world. That's definitely not in my skill set, definitely not in my remit, and definitely not something that I'll ever want to do. And I don't think you'd ever come to me for that opinion either, right? I don't think I can lend anything credible to that discourse. All I can talk about angrily is DJ lineups in football, right? That's the only thing that I know to an expert level. Everything else is just by the bloody by. What happened this weekend? Watched a couple of movies, watched a couple of series. I started a few, ended a few. I've started to do this thing now where I'm just giving up on stuff if I don't think it's good. I'm not doing the whole it gets better in the second season, because I tried to do that with Breaking Bad. Honestly, I'm probably the only person in the world who didn't really think Breaking Bad was all that great. The premise of the show is basically given to you in the first 5 episodes, and then it just kept longing it off, right? This flipping deadbeat guy, gets a terminal illness and then decides to be a drug dealer. Like, that's basically the story, and it just goes, fair enough, the realness of it, or whatever that term is called, the severity of the situation he gets himself into, the fact that it's always a continuing loop of fuck up, right? Every time he fixes something else messes up that's out of his control, within his control. No, that's the thing. Actually, it's actually a dialogue of how little control we actually have in our day-to-day lives, right? He comes from a very straight, I think he's a teacher, isn't he? Breaking Bad guy, Walt, right? He's a very straight, narrow kind of dude. He has his way of living and doing stuff, but then when he introduces chaos, everything just goes loop-de-loop in it, and it just makes complete sense. And anyone that's done any sort of level of hard drugs, you would know that just the littlest amount can really throw you off your course of what you're meant to be doing in your life. That's why most people would advise you to just, abstain from those kind of things. But for the most part, you got the gist of the show. In the first, I would say in the first season, you got the absolute gist of what that show is about. And after that, it just got a bit, samey same for me. But I was the kind of person that would stick with stuff, hold on and just wait for it to get better. But there's just no time to waste with that sort of stuff. Life is already grim as it is, living under some level of lockdown. The last thing you need to be doing is wasting your time with, audio visual torture that you've kind of inflicted on yourself. We have computers, we have internet. There's no need to subject yourself to something you don't like just because you want to say you watched it. It just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I kind of got rid of a few stuff, continued. I actually re-downloaded a show called Last Panthers, which is one of my favorite all-time spy drama espionage type of things. It kind of follows loosely the story of the Pink Panthers, a famous drug heist gang from somewhere within Central, Eastern Europe, and kind of follows their sort of origin tale. And it kind of follows the lead detective who's kind of enlisted to bring in a crew down. She finds one guy in a crew who's kind of susceptible to maybe being a good guy. He's doing it for like noble reasons. Da 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 da. It's a really great. It's a really, really, really great movie. I'm sorry, series. It's like a 6 episode series. I think it came out like Sky Atlantic a few years ago. One of my favorites. I think actually there was a rumor. I'm not too sure if that's actually real, but there was a rumor that whoever wrote the book, there's a book out at the moment about the Last Panthers. I'm not sure who read it or something around that sort of like crime heist sort of gang stuff, and somebody acquired the rights for it to make it into a film, and supposedly Leonardo DiCaprio was penciled in to be the person, but I'm not too sure if that's real. It might be one of those kind of rumors that you hear in the circuit. He might have read it, he might have been considered for it, but then he may have passed. Who knows? But it's definitely a story that could definitely have some wheels on it, especially if you remember the recent most kind of high profile thing they done allegedly was the whole Kim Kardashian stuff in Paris, where she got bounded up in her hotel room, and they stole diamonds and all sorts of other bits of jewelry, which kind of inevitably led to the end of the Pablo tour. I'm pretty sure was it along that kind of line. So there's definitely stuff that they could tie into it with current culture that people would be familiar with. They did that really famous one in, I'm gonna say, somewhere in the Middle East, where they drove a car into a shopping mall, reversed it inside it, robbed the place within a couple of seconds, and then flew back out again. There's another heist that they allegedly done during some sort of art biennale, and I think I'm gonna say it's somewhere like Denmark or something. I forgot where it was, and they escaped on a yacht. So there's been loads of really great, amazing heists that they've pulled over the years. There's a few people that have kind of, given interviews, but we don't know if they're real, if they're in the crew. But it's definitely fascinating in terms of where the crew kind of, originates from, parts of Serbia, formerly Yugoslavia, the war that happened there that basically left a lot of these young men desolate, who basically were fit, very well educated, and just need to put food on the table, and sought very extreme criminal means to do so, but they have a particular code. They move in silence. It's just a whole amazing little underworld that exists there. So I kind of went ahead and just decided to re-download that show, because why not watch stuff that you actually enjoy instead of watching stuff you don't. That was pretty decent. I watched this other documentary as well called B Movie, which is a kind of really good insight into the early sort of like new wave indie rock punk sort of movement in Berlin from the late 70s, early 80s. It gives a real good snapshot as to what it was like to live there at that time. It's made by this guy called Mark Reeder. I'll go and talk about it later. Actually, it's a pretty decent documentary, maybe one of the better ones I've seen. Reminds me a little bit of this other documentary that I watched ages ago called New Art City, which was sort of like a New York City kind of one vibe that sort of like, had loads of Super 8 footage, loads of talk about, what it was to grow up within that scene, the art scene, the music happening at the time, the skateboarding, graffiti, bloody blah, blah, blah. But it's a really good snapshot again into a part of Berlin that we probably don't see, especially because what did I watch? I watched what was it? What's that thing called again? It's a flipping spy espionage drama. It's called something. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I'll touch on it later. But yeah, I watched it recently, a spy drama. What is it? Deutschland 89, right? That's the one. Deutschland 89. I think they got 82, 87, 89, 3 seasons, and it sort of follows the rise and the fall of the Berlin Wall through the kind of the eyes of the officers that were kind of who are kind of enlisted to keep up or keep the order, keep the peace, whatever it may be. And it kind of follows a spy who was obviously working for West Berlin, an espionage sort of thing. People backstabbing each other. It follows, some of the activists that were kind of against it. Loads of really good perspective in a little 3 season show. German speaking, watching with subtitles is pretty decent. And again, you get a little of a snapshot. They have some archive footage they throw in there. It sort of reminds me a little bit of The Americans. That's another show that was really good. It sort of is more of a Soviet feel. It's kind of describes or portrays a family, a couple that decides to, are enlisted and kind of sent to America as spies to live covertly as a kind of regular family. And they basically, gather intelligence for the KGB. And it sort of follows the same sort of template as that. Really, really good show. Deutschland 89. So when I saw that, it kind of gives you another view of what it must have been like to live in that part of Germany during that time. And then, of course, once you develop it onwards and you kind of push it a bit further forward, it's the same sort of time frame. Actually, what I'm talking, same time frame. It's actually exactly the same time frame, because Mark Reeder moves. He leaves London to go to Berlin in the late 70s, sorry, to kind of get his career up and going, which might have been crazy during that time. And imagine living England in the early 70s and deciding to go there because you decide there's like a sick music scene that you kind of want to infiltrate. Because I'd imagine there was obviously the desire maybe to go to maybe parts of maybe Paris, because that was always a little bit of a sick little hideaway that people used to kind of go to in terms of discovering, in terms of an oasis culturally. You kind of go there to escape. And immerse yourself in culture and art and literature and all that sort of good stuff. And maybe, of course, New York. Maybe, during those years, it was probably a little bit expensive to travel those kind of places. You could probably drive to places like, I'm pretty sure in the documentary it does say you drove. But yeah, really cool stuff. Again, I will touch upon that later on the show, so definitely stick with me as we dive on deep. But first thing to get out of the way, of course, Man United lost 3-1 to Leicester. 3-1. Not a surprising result considering our form and considering just the approach that we have when it comes to games such as this, but a little bit of a confusing one if you just analyze it a bit deeper. So overall, in terms of the balance of the game, I think Leicester were fair and justified winners. I think they approached the game in a systematic way that brought the best out of their players, even with the injuries and even with the hectic schedule that we all have. Even though they don't have European football, we're still all playing games between every 3 to 5 days for the most part. So everyone's got a stacked schedule. The whole idea behind fatigue is, neither here or there for me at this stage of the season. That's what I would say anyway. But we started the game pretty well. I thought for the first 10 minutes we looked quite lively, running after the ball, chasing, pressing, not in any kind of organized way, but still it was there. Pogba looked really good within the first 10-15 minutes. I even mentioned on a couple of places when I was talking about the game, Pogba looks amazing. You can see the difference that he brings to the team, but obviously he's still working himself up to full fitness. So by the time it came to around 30 minutes, he basically had died. He'd exhausted all his kind of energy, which obviously was a shame, because it felt like, if he would have stayed on the pitch and we would have maybe moved some other players around, we probably still would have had a chance to win the game. But alas, that didn't transpire. Even though, that being said, we did concede a goal out from a mistake. We weren't really getting stretched that much, I feel like, in the first half. There were some instances where Leicester were trying to get in behind us, but we were defending pretty well for that time. But then, obviously, we decided to let them have a pretty easy goal, which resulted in Maguire sort of passing it to Fred, which he shouldn't have done. I still think the main responsibility lies with Fred. If you're a midfielder and you're asking for the ball in that position with your centre-backs, I'm old school. I want my centre-backs to defend. I want my centre-backs to kick the ball into row Z, to clatter into the opposing strikers within their area. I want defenders to first and foremost defend. This whole ball-playing centre-back stuff only applies to certain defenders and only applies to certain teams who can afford the luxury to do so. I think more often than not, if teams concentrate having the defenders actually defend, then over time you can maybe supplement one or two with, a midfielder here if you have an injury, or maybe you can get ball playing one to maybe supplement the ball winning ones, but you know what I mean. But I think overall, if you have better defenders playing, it will definitely do you the good long term, especially with United, especially with the manager like Oli, who doesn't necessarily seem to have like a way of playing for the most part. It's all a bit of a mishmash. It'd probably be best set just having good defenders. So with that, if you have good defenders, they should be giving the ball to the midfielder to carry it further up the pitch. So if Fred is asking for the ball, even if the position he asked for it was crazy, even if he didn't check his shoulders, he wasn't aware of who was behind him, he didn't know how much time he had on the ball, whatever, all those mistakes that he did make, the error is still on him. He should be in a position where he could either take the ball away from that position of, of concern, or win a foul. Those are the two options. Now, of course, you could then say Maguire as a leader, he should be more responsible and not pass him the ball because he has a better picture of the pitch. He's basically looking, out onto all the players, whereas, Fred is sort of back his face towards everybody else that's behind him. Fair enough. But so far, we've seen with Maguire, he's not really that kind of defender. He's not really that kind of captain. He's not really that sort of like leader that will push people around, tell them where to be, remind players of their responsibilities. That's not really what he does, which is concerning considering he's a captain and he's a centre back, right? You'd imagine if they give the captain's armband to a centre back at a top team like United, right? You'd imagine that person is usually the one that's sort of like cajoling everybody. He's sort of like the second coach on the team, right? He's the one. He's an on-field manager. You'd imagine he's a bit more, of an organizer. He pets people up to keep your chin up if we consider a goal, all that kind of good stuff. But for the most part, Maguire looks like the kind of defender who sort of leads by example, which is cool, but it's not maybe a captain material. So for people to expect him to like have the wherewithal to tell Fred, no, your man on, that's unlikely. But again, doesn't matter. The ball gets popped away from him. I think it goes to Vardy, and then he plays in a natural easy goal, goes around Dean Henderson, slots it in 1-0. Then we have a good period of possession, not really going anywhere, and then our first bit of attack where we sort of combine some passes in and around the box. We get it out into midfield, we're straight into their area. We then score a goal with Mason Greenwood and a perfect dummy by Van der Beek, who probably didn't have the best of halves himself, but he still played a pretty decent dummy considering everyone thought he was going to shoot. He let the ball run between his legs, and Greenwood comes in behind him and smashes it in 1-1. And at that point, you feel like, okay, even though let's have the momentum, we clearly have the better players individually on the pitch, I still think. Maybe outside defenders. I think there weren't a lot of Leicester players that you would swap for hours, right? It's a kind of a rubbish example, but that's what people would say, when it comes to these kind of things. Then, of course, second half starts and we just completely capitulate. We just don't really show up. We don't really turn the screws on and turn up in any sort of way. Yuri Tielemans scores a pretty good goal, but again, way too easy to get through us. A 1-2 that's played, 40 to 50 yards outside of our area. And from then he carries the ball about 20 yards and then smashes it into the bottom corner. Really easy goal. And then, of course, Kelechi Iheanacho towards the end again scores to make it 3-1. And by that time, the game is over. Solskjaer decides to make 4 subs all at once around, I think, the 60th minute or something like that. It might have been. Let me see if I got it. The stats here show on the screen. I think it was at the 60th minute. Like, everyone came on at once. I'm going to say 60th. What time was it? It doesn't say here, does it? Nah. But it was around the 60th minute, I'm going to say. Like, loads of people came on at the same time. That didn't really change much either. And again, it was just a complete, I think there it is. It was 73. No, here we go. Yeah, so about 4 subs all at once, right? There we go. 4 substitutions all at once. Absolutely nutty. And it didn't really affect the game, to be honest. Cavani came on, Luke Shaw, Scott McTominay, Bruno Fernandes, as sort of like for like substitution after we went 3-1 down. 2-1 down, sorry. So he kind of responded the first time you sort of really seeing Solskjaer responded that way. Assessment wise going forward, the concern, of course, always with this United team under Ollie is that so far it doesn't seem like we have a way of playing that can get us results outside of hitting teams on the counter. That's the only weapon we have in our arsenal. And the possession play that we do kind of have isn't necessarily systematic. It doesn't feel like we've practiced any positions, any combinations. We don't really score what you'd say outside of our counter-attacking goal. Can you really tell me of a trademark Manchester United goal under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer? It's not really set pieces. Maybe it's a penalty. Maybe it's a free kick. But there's not really anything in open play that you can say that, oh, this is how we sort of identified ourselves. We don't really have those sort of like, typical Liverpool goals, typical, even Chelsea are scoring typical goals for them at the moment, right? Everything happens sort of in the box. Man City, of course, have that typical goal that they score where they pull the ball back into the penalty area and somebody always, penalty spot, someone always kind of slots it in, usually Sterling, maybe Gabriel Jesus. It's always those type of goals that happen or flash across the goal. We don't really have that. So if that's the case, and if people who are fans of Oli are saying, hey, he needs better players, unfortunately, we're owned by the Glazers. And the Glazers so far have proved that they're only willing to invest to a certain point in this team. And if that's the case, then it's really unlikely that we're going to sign all our targets. People here, some fans think we're going to sign Sancho, we're going to sign Highland, we're going to sign a centre back, and we're going to sign I don't know, whatever else we need in our team, right? Because I still believe we probably still need a right wing, a centre back, a right back for competition for Aaron Wan-Bissaka, a defensive midfielder that can actually start, right? Coming straight into a team and sort of command that DM role, so you don't have to play two defensive midfielders in that position. And then of course a right wing forward and a centre forward. So that's probably 5 players there that we need, right? Maybe you could say 4. You can maybe condense the centre back and the DM role. Maybe if you want, get someone versatile that can play 2 of those positions, maybe like a Declan Rice sort of esque of a profile of player. But overall, we need 5 of those players, right? And if we're being linked with the Haalands and the Sanchos, that's already 200 million easy for those 2 players. That's not going to happen. And then you still have to buy 3 more. So this idea that we're going to sign all our targets is ridiculous, unless we obviously lower the requirements. But I still don't think, the concerning thing for me is that we still had pretty much a full strength side, I would say, right? I would say Martial is probably still number 1 striker. Greenwood probably still number 1 in terms of right wing forward. Maybe Van der Beek is not the option on the left. Maybe someone like Bruno or whatever else. But generally, in terms of our overall lineup, that was a pretty full strength side, right? In terms of looking at Paul Pogba, Martial, Greenwood, Van der Beek, Matic, Fred. Maybe you change a couple of players. Defenders are out of the 4. Maybe only Tellers is the one that's maybe different. But overall, it's not that different to what we play week in, week out. So for the team to completely capitulate and not have any idea how to play football makes me concerned about what we do in training. Like, what are we practicing? What is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer doing in terms of coaching these players to get the best out of them? Because if we will agree that we're the second best team in the league, because the league table doesn't lie, then why is it when we face these other teams that aren't next to us or aren't near us in the table, are basically below us in the table, let's say, why is it suddenly now it becomes the fault of maybe the players and not the manager? If the manager is responsible for getting us second, why then suddenly in these typical games we can't fault him anymore? And that's the issue that I have. So if we do want to go forward with this Ole Gunnar Solskjaer experiment, he's going to need a blank checkbook. He's going to need the ability to sign whoever he wants to sign, and that isn't going to happen. He's going to have to play under some level of constraints. And if he doesn't get top 4 football, or if he doesn't, we've basically proven over the years with the Glazers, if we get top 4 football, they usually withdraw the funds more because they feel as if they can get away with it. And if we don't get it, then they spend more. So he's in a win-lose position. And if anything, Solskjaer probably needs the FA Cup or the Europa League more than we do. We probably need to win the league to cement our kind of return back to the big time, or to maybe push Man City within a few points, let's say, during one title season, right? That's what we probably need. We don't really need a Europa Cup, Europa League. We won that already with Mourinho. We probably need to be in a Champions League with season in, season out, actually competing, qualifying from our group, getting into the knockout stage. That's what we actually do need as a team. But Solskjaer, as a manager, he probably needs a trophy more than we do. So why would he go into this sort of game with a lineup that you wouldn't say is a full strength lineup, maybe first teamers, and then when it doesn't go right, he doesn't necessarily have a plan to correct the issues? Now, it's not all his fault. The players that played obviously didn't really make that much of a song and dance out of themselves. You could say Mason Greenwood didn't play too well. Martial didn't play too well. Van der Beek obviously was a bit hot and cold. Matic was moving like a fridge. Fred obviously was, making loads of unforced errors. Tellez was good going forward, but probably not the best at defending. Maguire and Lindelof, the deal with them too. Aaron Wan-Bissaka, the same thing goes to him. Dean Hansen, probably the only one that can have you something good to say. But again, that's a lot of players that had an off day all at once. Usually that points to errors within the preparation of our team. The reason why we always start games so slow, the reason why we don't tend to kind of take initiative and sort of play the game, kind of impose our will on the other team, the fact that we have to go behind in order to see a response, all these sort of things that are kind of making you think, if it's happening so often, especially at this level, at this stage, when trophies are on the line, right? In the, we were, if we would have won, we would have maybe faced Southampton in the next round, which would maybe a favourable draw for us. It really does go to show either the mentality of the players isn't where it needs to be, or the coach isn't doing what he should be doing with the players he has available. Because quite clearly, by the league position, we are the second best club in the country, allegedly, right? Based on the individuals that we have. So if that's the case, we should be going to Leicester with maybe a couple of our first teamers, quote unquote, out of the team and still winning. And the fact that we didn't, in my opinion, just shows that quite clearly, maybe Oli long term isn't the guy. He done a good job, a great job, an amazing job post Mourinho. Breath of fresh air, right? He really lifted the mood. The dark cloud that existed over Carrington during Mourinho's stay, horrendous. I think Tottenham fans are sort of feeling the brunt of that now at the moment. Mourinho's not the same guy that he was in the past, right? He's probably past it as a coach, maybe a bit of maybe embittered, whatever it is. The attitude that he does bring to teams now isn't invigorating. It doesn't inspire confidence. He calls people out when he's not winning, and then when they do win, he takes all the credit. Just a really cancerous sort of influence that you have in your team. Great guy to come in post Mourinho is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. All happy, all smiles, happy to have the job, happy to be of service, selfless maybe to a fault. Loads of good stuff, but overall, in terms of a long term, the fact that he never sort of complains about the team, he's happy with his players. He says he's great with the board. He's not really going to ruffle any feathers. So if we are doing as poorly as doing now, you can't then go and blame the players and say you need more signings, because you said you were happy with what you have, and you've signed quite a few of these players. This is looking like more of a this is looking more like a Solskjaer team than it is any other team that has come there fourth. Do you know what I mean? He's got rid of the players, or the players who have left are the ones that he didn't want to keep. So there is no excuse now going forward. There has to be trophies. And I think when your manager's coming out and saying stuff like, oh, trophies aren't important, it doesn't really inspire that much confidence going forward, does it? Again, I still think we'll finish top four. We've probably got our only chance of winning trophies now is Europa League. So that's going to be difficult, facing Granada in the second round. In the next round, knockout stages, I'm not really sure why everyone's so confident we're going to beat them. I think we've seen so far when Man United face teams that are great in terms of keeping the ball in possession, we usually suffer. I don't think they're going to allow us to hit them on the counter time and time again. That's how we're definitely going to score. So if that's the case, it's going to be a cagey game. It's not going to be easy. If we're going to take them, we take them for granted at our peril. But again, that's the only chance for a trophy that he has, which is, in my opinion, significantly harder to win than the FA Cup, I'd imagine. Especially when you consider the teams that you're facing, the fact that you haven't seen them play too often, the traveling, all that sort of stuff. So it just didn't make any sense in it going forward. But hey, maybe there is a grander plan that I'm not aware of, that we're going to be aware of, maybe sooner rather than later. Who knows? Oh, I'm drinking a bit of water here. The one good thing about football, it sort of teaches you. So, why did I do that for? I don't know why I did that for. Why did I do that? There you go, we're back. The one good thing about football, it sort of teaches you how out of control you are with most things, how most things are not in your control. Whatever you do, whatever thing that you think is going to be great, this would help out the team more, blah, 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 blah. Why don't we do this? You realize quite soon when you follow teams, especially teams at the higher echelons, competing for trophies and stuff. There's so many conflicting things go on behind the scenes that you're not really privy to, that affect loads of stuff that's going on, right? My kind of insistence, I still think, we overpaid for Harry Maguire. Leicester, sold him to us for 80 million, and they go and, they don't look worse for wear. Whereas if we took Maguire out of our team, would be on the floor, but he's still not great. But then he's made captain. He gets selected for England all the time. So there's probably things within his contract that basically stipulate that he has to play. So those kind of weird things that you don't know as a fan, that tied into everything that he does, tied into his boot sponsorship, tied into his brand deals. There are all these weird stuff that go on behind the scenes. So I think football does teach you sometimes. It's great in terms of passion and something to look forward to, especially during COVID and whatever. But it does teach you how to somehow not get overly emotional when it comes to stuff like that, because, no one's going to listen to you. No one cares what you think. Your opinion is mute. Your opinion is invalid. Doesn't matter how much money you spend with the club, following them all up and down the country, buying every bit of merch that they put out there, looking like a flipping living tie, right? No one cares. And I think that's a great sort of omen into what regular life is like anyway. And we've kind of dealt with that during COVID, isn't it? We've definitely had our eyes open in terms of no one actually caring. Talking about people caring, over the weekend, a group of anarchists and rebels decided to descend all across London and parts of Bristol, basically protesting the lockdowns, isn't it? Just saying you've had enough. And it's funny because if for the most part, according to our roadmap, we're due to come out of our most strenuous levels by what, April 12th, right? So in a few weeks we're due to come out of the levels that are not allowing us to go to our non-essential shops and salons and gyms, which is basically a sign of normality. So for people to be processing now is a bit mute, but maybe just goes to show people's frustration levels have just reached boiling point and people have had enough, especially when you look at the numbers. I think, was it the other day we had like 17 deaths or something, right? So vaccination is obviously working really well. People within a vulnerable group, I think up to half have been vaccinated already. So people are sitting there at home thinking, hold on, if half the people that have at risk have been vaccinated and cases are dropping, so are deaths, why are we all locked inside our homes? It doesn't make any sense. And I think a lot of these people are still the ones that are like protesting early in flipping August, right? Which was insane. But I think now that we've got some perspective and we've got some time and we can kind of all sit back and stroke our chins, we have to agree, especially when we've seen the great examples of New Zealand, Australia, parts of Southeast Asia, like Vietnam and stuff. Lockdowns in general don't work, especially in places like Europe. It just doesn't work. And for a long-term strategy, you can't do it. The only times you can do it, of course, if you live in those sort of other countries like Australia and New Zealand, where you can maybe control your borders a bit more. You can you can put things into place maybe law-wise that other countries probably can't, in terms of taking away people's quote-unquote civil liberties and all that sort of malarkey temporarily, you'd hope. But you just can't do that in Europe. You can't do that in the Western Hemisphere. It's just impossible to do. People, number one, are not going to comply, and number two, is a long-term strategy. It's just ineffective. It really is ineffective, and it's basically been proved, because no matter how we look at the numbers and how we look at the approach, we can blame Boris for a lot of the stuff that obviously went down in terms of not basically acting on the evidence that he was given. But overall, we are where we are because we just can't handle staying indoors for too long. People decide to throw raves, travel places, go on holiday. People go on holiday in like July, August, right? We just can't do it. So I think we're in a position by our own, desire to go outdoors and live a regular, normal life that every human being should kind of be permitted to live. And you just can't stop people from doing that. You can't stop people from having that need to socialize and hang out. And I think I saw it a lot. The penny dropped for me with all the illegal raves. Like, everything to myself, why is it constantly these illegal raves keep happening when everyone knows the severity of the punishment is super high, especially during COVID, right? No one wants to get fined, let alone during a time when you probably don't have that much disposable income. You may be out of work, you're on furlough, whatever it is, your future's uncertain. You don't want to be, spending and paying 200 quid to go to a dusty rave somewhere for half an hour because you got shut down by the police. But it felt like people's desire to go there was magnetic. They just needed to be around other people, right? Sort of like a moth to a flame. It just couldn't help it. And that's just human nature. We can't fight it. It's just part of us. And I guess this is just what we're seeing now with these lockdown protests in London and parts in Bristol and all over the world. People are just having enough, and they're saying, look, we just want our freedoms back. We just want to be able to go outdoors. And I think maybe as well, we basically, as a society, maybe people in government, they basically overestimate everyone's desire to like keep others safe and happy and healthy and, make sure someone's granny doesn't die. For the most part, people don't care, right? They want, they're sort of basically looking after themselves and people around them. And they'd much rather live, 37 years of quasi freedom as opposed to, essentially eradicating a year of their lives from just staying indoors. That's kind of the bargain I think a lot of people are willing to sort of give up. And you're seeing that in America, right? People in America know the risks. They know that it's real. There are some, there's a fringe minority of people that think COVID doesn't exist, but for the most part, everyone exists. Everyone knows it's a real thing, but they're willing to take the risk. And if they are willing to take the risk, I think it's up to the government to basically comply with their desires and just open things up, because this whole staying indoors thing for a prolonged period of time, especially with the vaccine, it blows my mind. Really, it does blow my mind. But hey, we'll continue on. This article from the BBC said COVID arrest during anti-lockdown protests in London. Says thousands of people have attended demonstrations in London after MPs urged the government to allow peaceful protests during lockdown. Crowds marched from Hyde Park to Westminster with at least 33 arrests by police, mostly for COVID breaches. Scotland Yard said the number of people attending Saturday's demonstration exceeded expectations. The Home Office said it was still illegal for people to attend protests under the current coronavirus rules. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Taylor told the BBC more people than previously expected were at the Saturday protest, but the Met has not given a formal estimate of the number in attendance. BBC correspondent Marina Spring, reporting from the anti-lockdown protest, said the atmosphere was animated and a number of people appeared to be angry about restrictions on peaceful protests. Later in Hyde Park, police were forced to run back to their vans as protesters threw bottles and cans at them. PA media reported that the home members, that some members of the public then left the park with small children carried by their parents. The funny thing is, there was a remarkably less sort of like police altercations with members of the public than there was at the vigil that occurred with a young lady that died recently, allegedly at the hands of the police officer. So in terms of optics, this is horrendous, right, for the police department to be in a position where they're sort of essentially dragging and pulling women across from a vigil, pinning them down to the floor, handcuffing them when scores of protesters are going out to protest the lockdowns, are basically being faced off with masks and stormtrooper outfits, but no real violence for the most part. So it definitely goes to show this. There's a girl here with a sign that says freedom over fear. Another one that says lockdown is depression, loneliness, homelessness, bankruptcy, domestic abuse, suicide. For sure, agree with that one. Loads of scores of people again out there protesting and marching. And the funny thing is, for sure, in July, they would have been described as COVID idiots. But now a huge swath of the regular population, because again, I'm sure there are loads of those sort of like, anti-establishment anarchist types out there. But looking at that picture here, it looks like some regular schmegular people, right? Just everyday Londoners deciding, hey, I need to have my voice heard. So things have definitely changed. The atmosphere, the climate, the feeling around people has definitely changed in that regards. And you can see again, there's a video here from, where's this account called Reputely, showing an image of people protesting and marching in central London. It was funny too because most of the reporting said there was hundreds when quite clearly there's more than hundreds there. There's people marching on very busy streets in London and just, it's just wall to wall of people. You can't see any cars at all. That's at least 10,000 plus of people just, marching all the way down around the streets, having enough. Plus, you have to imagine a lot of people. I think now the rules have changed, so you can meet at least one person outside of your household. So there's a lot of people that are probably out anyway. That decide to, let's just jump on this and get involved too. Yeah. God forbid something else happens like this, like another, virus of this nature. People are not going to accept lockdowns again. They just won't. You don't want it to happen again in our lifetime. Don't get me wrong. But if it does occur again, it's just not going to run. People are just not going to have it. I think we've learned our lesson with this one. I think I think those images, those early images from Italy and places and parts of China with dead bodies getting thrown in the back of flipping ice, cold trucks or whatever they call ice trucks, whatever they are, refrigerated trucks, they put meat and shit inside in. Remember those images of people being, basically taped inside their homes, locked in, putting all, hazard tape all over where they can't leave. Scores of African immigrants being chucked out of their homes because, for some reason people in China thought the virus was coming from parts of Africa. Like loads of crazy shit was happening, right? We saw images. So I don't really begrudge parts of people in government deciding and getting scared and worried that they're gonna have the blood of potentially millions of their citizens on their hands. But now that we've seen how it affects people, who it affects, the age demographic, what you lose from putting people on lockdown. We just have to agree, long term, it's just not a strategy that we can do in Western Hemisphere. We of course have seen the success stories in Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, and South Korea, parts of places that have done it well, but we just don't have what it takes societally to do that. We just don't. It's a shame, but it just is what it is. There we go, police marching around the street, all in Hyde Park, flares and shit. There's a lot of rough barnets in this clip, in it. Loads of hair, loads of beards. Everyone's looking rough. Everyone looks like they need a bit of a treatment, a little bit of a salon, a little bit of R&R. Yeah, that's a lot of people, man. That's more than hundreds. That's definitely thousands, for sure. Crazy, man. So yeah, people have just had enough. That's it. They've simply had enough, and they want to get back to living some semblance of normality. Now, of course, the great thing for us, we do have some light at the end of the tunnel, but it still feels like it's just taking too long, in it. When you consider the cases going down and whatnot, it just feels like it's taking a little bit too long. But glad that we've got something coming down the pipeline, because we could be in a worse position. We could be, in parts of flipping Europe, like Germany, right? They're really suffering of stuff, and we don't want to be anywhere included in there. So definitely thankful that is happening. Boom, 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 boom. What else we got here? Let's move on. We spoke about that. Oh shit, yeah. So in terms of places where it's not going so right, it's not going so well at the moment. Look at what's happening in Miami. Absolute madness. So I think, what was it? Was it a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago? Ron DeSantis decided, I think he's the mayor, right? He's not governor of Miami, I'm pretty sure. He decided to basically lift the lockdown, permit everybody to reopen as per normal, wear a mask if you need to wear one, stay away if you have to stay away, if you're at risk, vaccinations still continue. And he was derided, right? He was really taking the piss out of by a lot of people in states, like, oh, he's putting people into danger. There was a story allegedly that he wasn't publishing the numbers, which then got debunked. Loads of really messy stuff that happened at the time, and I was all for it, because I'm part of the great thing they've got in the States, which we don't have here in Europe, especially in the UK, is that I don't think presidents can basically mandate states to do certain things. The state basically decides of their own accord based on their leadership. So effectively, what they basically got running in America, which is kind of hard to do because this landlocked and people can travel in and out of state, but they're essentially running loads of different experiments as to what is the best COVID approach, right? Some states are deciding to lock things down in a draconian way. Some places are deciding to leave things open. Other places are doing in between. Everyone's got their own approach of what they're doing. So you get really good bits of data and information as to what works for some people, what doesn't work for other people. And I guess in terms of just living, in terms of how people exist in certain places like Miami, maybe people are a little bit less willing to follow rules that prevent them from living their lives, right? They are probably more liberty and freedom based than other places. Who knows? I've not lived there. I have no idea, but it did seem to kind of correlate more with that state, that Ron DeSantis would decide to say, hey, just go and live your life, be sensible, of course. And that, of course, unfortunately, welcomed in loads of criticism, which made sense considering the volatile and emotional nature of everything. And of course, then was a great sort of welcoming call, and sort of flew the flag out there, said, hey, if you're living in a state where you can't live your life and do the things that you love, you should move over here. So it effectively kind of boosts their economy, creates more jobs, all this sort of good stuff. So it's a weird kind of net positive negative sort of thing, up and down. But of course, the other side of it is this: during spring break, it's an article from BBC. It said Miami Beach imposes emergency curfew over spring break chaos. As you can see here, just tons and tons of, young people out on spring break, who've been locked inside their homes for the best part of a year, maybe less, deciding to descend out in Miami and just have a little bit of a good time during these bleak times that we're in. But of course, it gets a bit too crazy and things have to get called off. So it says the following: the state of emergency has been declared in the US city of Miami Beach over the concerns of large crowds. At 8 to 6 curfew has been announced in the island city and will remain in effect for at least 72 hours. Traffic restrictions are in place during the curfew, while businesses in the busy South Beach area must close. So probably the big, you'd imagine, especially, having to suffer through lockdown and not be able to open your business, and then you have the ability to open it temporarily. You have the ability to open it for a short period of time, and then you think, oh, spring break is coming. You have another ability to maybe make up some money you lost, and then to have it closed down again must be horrendous, especially for those hours, right? I'd imagine those are the peak hours. People are buying liquor, going out, eating food. Miami Beach Mayor Dan Gilb. Sorry, Miami Beach. So I guess Ron DeSantis is governor of Florida, not Miami, right? I don't know. Whatever. Let's continue. Miami Beach Mayor Dan Gelbar said thousands of tourists had brought chaos and disorder to the city, and it's quite easy to see he's probably a Democrat, right? I'd imagine. It feels like a rock concert, wall-to-wall people over blocks, said Mr. Gilbert told CNN. If you're coming here to go crazy, go somewhere else. Spring break is a holiday period in schools and universities in the US that usually takes place in March and April. It attracts thousands of students to Florida and other warm weather destinations around the country. Officials warn tourists to vacation responsibly or be arrested prior to the holiday period. And a county-wide midnight coronavirus curfew was already in place due to the pandemic, but in the Miami Beach area was thronged with revelers over the weekend, and many did not appear to be wearing masks, especially this thing, which you could definitely see there. Not on mask, or there's a couple of masks there in sight, but for the most part, everyone's just, doing what they need to be done. One city official described South Beach as includes the world famous Ocean Drive as being overwhelmed by crowds on Saturday. You couldn't see at the pavement, you couldn't see grass, said city manager Ron Aguila. He added that the emergency measures were necessary not only to protect our residents, but our visitors, including our spring breakers who want to keep safe. On Sunday, Miami Beach police told CNN they had arrested at least a dozen people after the curfew had come into force. Amazing, isn't it? Until the measures are lifted, will prevent the pedestrians or vehicles, South Beach area for the main party strip. But I'm assuming that's probably the tourist area, I'd imagine. Probably not the place where actual Miami people live. Mr. Aguila told Miami Herald newspaper that he is recommended to keep the emergency measures in place until April 12th. Jesus. But the emergency orders will expire on Tuesday evening unless they are extended by local authorities. Florida continues to be the coronavirus hotspot in the US. The state has recorded nearly 2 million of the country's 29 infections since the pandemic began. The latest data from the US show that Florida has recorded 4,300 new infections a day, and the average over the past week. Of course, you can see there people enjoying themselves, having a blast. And then there's this epic video as well. This is I found on Reddit. Waiter chases down a dine and dasher in Miami. So imagine, right? We're post-COVID, we're post-lockdown. People are suffering. Businesses have lost tons of money. They're just opening for a short period of time. They're not sure when things are going to close up again. So there's loads of panic. Supply chains are all messed up. You're not sure if you got staff. Like, it's a whole shit show. And then imagine, right? You do that, you open, and then you decide to, support your community, support your citizens, support people that are coming out of state, give them an opportunity to go out and forget their worries and eat a good bit of dinner. And, because that's the one thing everyone wants to do after lockdown. You want to be served. You want to be dined. You want to be pampered and, looked after for somebody. You want some sort of service people want to serve you too. It's a match made in heaven, but not for these psychos. They decide to go and dine and dash at their big age. Usually you'd imagine dine and dashes would be something that you do when you're like, I don't know, under the age of 21, when you legitimately have no money to your name. But you can't be traveling to another state in America with $100 in your pocket and not enough to cover the food and the drink that you're going to go and consume when you're out there. It just doesn't make any sense. It's super, super embarrassing. And it's even worse because they're all black kids and they decide to dash. But let me play the video for you now. So in case you're just listening to the audio, there's a video, intersection somewhere. right, in the middle of Miami, I guess, and there's girls for some reason deciding to twerk and shake their bums in the intersection. I don't know what that means or what that does, but it is what it is. And then you see a couple of guys running across the camera. And a waiter drags one of them down. I guess one of them runs. I guess they probably split off, and smartly the waiters decide to pin one person, because usually if you're chasing after, I'd imagine the smart thing to do if you're chasing after thieves is to isolate one or two of them, but don't go after all, because you're gonna lose them all. So isolate one, the weakest in the pack, and just run him down. And they finally do that, and they drag one of the guys down on the floor, and it just turns into a weird tussle that everyone's sort of looking at. It's so funny and really embarrassing, because it's all on video. Everyone knows that you're the dine and dasher, innit? And I'd imagine his bill probably wasn't, again, just imagine what they paid, even if it's Miami, right? Even if it's Ibiza prices, you're probably paying what? Max $50 per head, maybe $100 if you include drinks, whatever. You're traveling to places like that. You know what the prices are, and you decide to run during a lockdown. Just boggles the mind. Trips him up, the way it trips him up. He runs again, he pulls him down. The funny thing is as well, it seems like the other waiter that isn't black, or doesn't look like he's black, is the one that's a bit more resistant or whatever, hesitant to pull the guy down. It's actually the other dude who happens to be black, who's actually hell bent on showing, no, you're not going to get away with this. I'm going to pin you down. And you could imagine, right? They're looking after the guys, they're being happy and giving bantering with them, probably charging their phones when they ask for it, putting certain music on, let them sit in a certain table, and then you decide to run away. You probably took that really personally. And it's they're pulling the guy, taking him back to a restaurant. Oh, sorry, my bad. He doesn't look like he's probably Cuban or something. I'd imagine Miami people, right? They're pulling him. So embarrassing. Look, he tries to run off again, and because his shoes aren't tied properly, he buckles and falls over again. Is that his foot or his ankle broken? Look at that. So embarrassing. And he's got trainers on that are probably worth more than the meal that he put together, and they're taking him off and escorting him back to the premises. And ironically, because he ran off on a bill that he probably would have paid less for because he's with a group, he's now going to have to pay the whole amount because he decided to take the piss. So absolute horror show of a situation. And I'd imagine that's probably echoed in loads of parts of the US. I'd imagine probably the worst type of customers. I guess the best and the worst are happening. Probably passing through your doors post-COVID. The kind of people that are willing to put, a few hundred down as a tip because they're just happy to be outdoors and being served, and sort of want to give you guys a thank you gift as a sort of hey, you're on the front line risking your life so I can have a flipping steak with my family. And there are those people who also that are going out and just penny pinching and deciding to give you only the money to the exact penny, right? Do you know what I mean? That they come to their bill. So it must be a complete horror show out there at the moment, man. A complete and utter horror show. But hey, what can you do? What can you do? Moving on. How much time have I used up already here? I think I'm about an hour in it, right? Cool, hour in. Let's continue. Let's just drum on. So no, let's move on. Let's not talk about that one. I don't want to talk about that. Let's move on from that. What else we want to talk about here? Oh, this is pretty good. Yeah. So let's talk about this, actually, the margarita thing. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I have been watching a few documentaries and movies over lockdown, trying to get myself all cultured up and whatnot. And I stumbled across this documentary called B-Movie Lust and Sound in West Berlin. And I kind of found it, I'm pretty sure, from 1979 to 1989, directed by Mark Reeder, right? And I found it out based on an interview with somebody in the German magazine called lolamag.de. It's a really cool magazine, a bit hipster, kind of, focuses on all cool people in Berlin doing, cool, interesting things in art, design, fashion, all that stuff, music. And it has a really cool profiles, and it profiled this one dude who has a record label and a little merch store that he puts together. He signs indie acts and new wave bands, and he puts out his own records and stuff. Really cool interview. And he mentioned, like, as throwaway during the interview itself, that he was inspired to set up his label, because of the movie or because of the documentary Boo movie, right? He kind of, his aesthetic is sort of like based upon that whole scene and that whole era. And then I had to thought, you know what, let me just check it out, because I've never actually seen it myself. And obviously I Googled it, and it looks amazing. Essentially kind of depicts a scene in the history of Berlin I'm not really familiar with. Of course, I'm familiar with the techno side of things from, let's say, the late 80s or let's say early 90s onwards. I'm familiar with a lot of that. I've read up on a lot of that history. I've kind of watched a lot of those documentaries and, read up on other things in terms of interviews and all that sort of malarkey. Of course, nothing beats actually being there and living through it, but I've kind of got a good grips of it. I go there quite often myself, so I kind of understood what's kind of occurred. But there's a whole history, a whole part of the Berlin history that I didn't understand in terms of new wave. That's kind of not even part of my lexicon or stuff that I was aware of in terms of my knowledge base. And this has been such a great eye-opener, especially when I then watched it just after I finished watching Deutschland 89, which is a great espionage drama that talks about the rise and fall of the Berlin Wall, secret spy agents working for West Berlin, counteracting stuff that's happening in East Berlin. That really cool TV series. There's 3 seasons. I think it's Deutschland 82, 86 and 89. I think so. Check it out. It's really good. And it's a kind of good little primer to watching this documentary. And it focuses on Mark Rieder, who for some reason, I don't know why that was a great idea at the time. It's been a genius idea at the time, but he decides to move from London, or move from Manchester, which again is a base of great, indie music and just bands in general, and decides to kind of find fame and fortune out in Berlin. And this is during a time where, there's no internet. He's probably going to have to learn to speak German, because I imagine it's not as multicultural as it is now, as it was back then. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just speaking out of turn here. I don't really have that much knowledge of that time in history. But he decides to go out there, and he, for some reason, has the wherewithal to film all this stuff that he's doing at the time. He catalogs it. I guess a lot of it has to do with the fact that he was working for a TV program, I think, and he got profiled a few times, and he obviously is quite media friendly himself, but he puts together all this great archive footage that basically traverses and tells his entire history and story from the time that he left Manchester and moved to Berlin, and sort of kind of shows you an entirely different perspective and view of what that city was like when the wall was up, and also when the wall fell, but also a city prior to the boom in dance music, to the boom in electronic music, to the boom in DJ culture. Like, it just shows you a completely entirely different part of Berlin that you're probably not that aware of, and I really recommend that you guys check it out. It's really great, like really, really good. One of my easily a really good wanderlust. It maybe is a bit hard to watch now because you're in lockdown. It kind of wants you to, makes you want to go out and just travel and discover things again. But it definitely does reawaken that desire for me to kind of document stuff, report on things. I used to do loads of vlogs and stuff and reviews, scene reports, all this sort of thing, because a lot of it can be annoying now. People always having a camera and sort of like shoving in your face and asking your view on things, but just the actual act of documenting, like I think even Gary Vee says a lot of it, right? If you can't actually create a new idea or whatever it may be, just document what you're doing. Just kind of explain, record your day to day, because it might seem insignificant now, but as time goes on, as you kind of grow into being a different person, other opportunities come your way. That footage, when you look back on it, will be kind of would be something that you look back on and really thank yourself for recording. So let's play a little bit of the trailer now. This is B movie Lost and Sound in West Berlin, 1979 to 1980, a documentary by Mark Rieder. Let's play a bit of it now.
Sie empfangen den Berliner Rundfunk mit Nachrichten. Eine Ehrenparade der Nationalen Volksarmee leitete am Vormittag in Berlin den 32. Jahrestag der Deutschen Demokratischen Republik ein. Stürmische Beifall und Hochrufe galten dem Generalsekretär des ZKD-SED und Vorsitzenden des Staatsrates der DDR, Erich Honecker, und weiteren Mitgliedern der Partei und Staats...
During the 80s, West Berlin was a city in a state of emergency. A creative melting pot for sub and pop culture, masterminding amateurs and potential global superstars. West Berlin was unpredictable. My name is Mark Rieder, and I am from Manchester. At the end of the 70s, I was stranded in Berlin. What I would experience over the next 10 years in West Berlin, I have documented in this film.
Just come along with me and we'll go and have a look at the city. Paint the town red. That's what it's all about.
Before the Iron Curtain fell, Berlin was a walled-in island, full of artists, hedonists and squatters, all living on the edge of life. It was never about long-term success. It was about living for the moment and the thrill, the here and now. West Berlin was the place to be. The days were short and the nights were long, endlessly long. Nick Cave once hit the nail on the head. In Berlin, there are the most beautiful women, the best drugs, and a lot of people who give the artists the respect they deserve. But this place will never be the same again. It no longer exists. In this film, I will take you on my own personal journey through the wild West Berlin of the 1980s.
The stars come down. You need a drug to make you shine. You need the pills to take you home.
But honestly, it is marvelous. Easily one of the best documentaries I've watched in recent years. So good, and it really kind of it's sort of you kind of understand why a lot of people talk so glowingly and have such fond memories of how Berlin was in the past, years gone by, maybe let's say late 90s, early 2000s, and they say why it's not the same anymore. Because when you see what it was when it first sort of like erupted as this cultural hub, especially parts of West Berlin, right, before the wall fell down, after the wall fell down, you sort of get to see like, wow, man, just imagine how it was, like how freeing it must have been to just decide to set up a sound system in an abandoned building somewhere, throw some of the most amazing raves with no restrictions, formulate an entire scene, give opportunities to people that go on to be some of the most biggest cultural definers and noisemakers and cultural shifters in the scene at the moment. You give them an opportunity to sort of play this rave. You don't really know anything at the time, you're just doing it for the love, and you kind of cultivate this entire thing that goes on to being your life's work. It goes on to being something that kind of support you and your family for years on end, right? Most of those people have kind of decided, for various parts of the reason, to kind of venture off and do other things within the scene still, even if they're not in front of the decks or in this club themselves, they're still attached to it. So a whole ecosystem, a whole industry was born off of that time, and we're still enjoying the fruits of it now, even nowadays. But it's not the same, and you get to see why it's not the same. And imagine we're still seeing this sort of like fifth, third hand, right? This has been edited down. This stuff that's archive footage is obviously a certain time in history through certain people's lenses. So it's still not a clear depiction of it, because you can never really experience anything until you're actually there. But it definitely gives you an idea of like, oh, this is why people keep talking about the past so much. This is why they keep talking about how great it was back then when, rents were like, I don't know, 400 euros for a massive 3-bed apartment somewhere. It's really great. I do kind of relate a lot to the Nick Cave. In the documentary, it features him, a young Nick Cave. Mark Reeder meets him out there. I think Nick Cave meets Mark Reeder out there. He sort of wants to go and find himself again creatively, sort of similar to what Iggy Pop and David Bowie did back in the day too. And they sort of link up. They decide to go out. He formulates a new band. It breaks up and whatever it may be. But he did what I kind of done, right, with it, where I've kind of dipped and dabbed, sort of dipped my toe in it for a few times, but then gone out, because I've known, it probably isn't the place for me to live day in, day out, because I'll probably eventually get lost in the source. But he definitely had a good understanding of its power in terms of it being a generator, a place to go to sort of like culturally awaken yourself, because people don't really, it's sort of like an adult playground. It sort of reminds me of like a cultural version of what Florida is to like, pasty white people in America, where they kind of go there just to kind of as an excuse to just lay around and not do much. Same kind of a thing occurs over there, but you just get the opportunity to sort of, explore all your niche interests that you probably couldn't get away with having it be you're living in other parts of Europe, right? You couldn't probably get away with being a chiropractor or, you know, a plant healer or a masseuse or a yoga teacher or whatever. You know, you have to sort of get back into reality. And that's a great thing about it. Like, reality is just an illusion, right? There is no such thing as reality when you live in those kind of places, especially in that time. It's just whatever you decide to make it to be. It's exactly what your reality is. And I think Nick Cave understood that and sort of was able to kind of dip in and dip out of it. And it's a really good primer to sort of like show you, maybe a reminder, maybe not, you know, subcultures aren't the same as they were in the past, don't get me wrong, but they do still exist. And there is still a desire and a requirement, if you're trying to get involved and you're trying to be a part of it, to really get involved and be a part of it. You know, set up a band, get involved in the band, you know, put on parties, set up a crappy label, whatever it may be. Like, take part, really involve yourself with these sort of things, because culturally, and just in terms of the artistic timeline of wherever you're from, and you just your own history as well, you never know how much impact and what significance the tiny thing that you do will have to the entire timeline of things going forward. And you just look back on it 5 years later, 10 years later, you're like, rotted, look at that small thing that I did that led me to go to all these different places, meet all these different people, that eventually led you to an entirely different career. But you never know if you would have got there without those kind of formative years of sort of just figuring stuff out with your friends. It's just one of the coolest things to see, people just figuring it out. You're seeing a lot of it now at the moment with these sort of like weird magazine zine things that people are doing in New York, where they're sort of kind of taking it back to that sort of like pre-blogging era where people were putting out zines and whatnot it may be. And it's great. You want people to participate with these things a bit more. And I'm hoping in the post-lockdown world, people are maybe like thinking, hey, as great as this digital world is that we're sort of existing in at the moment, as great as all these sort of new technologies that exist, nothing really beats human connection. Nothing really beats being around people, right? And sort of cultivating a scene, cultivating your personality, a friendship group, your interests, your wants, your desires, right? In real time, nothing really beats that. And the only way you can do it is by actively taking part in things and really committing yourself to being a part of it and trying your best to sort of ingrain yourself in it, and not just, you know, criticizing from afar, pointing fingers, telling people what they're doing wrong or right. No. Put some skin in the game yourself and get involved. And this documentary is definitely a great reminder of it. Honestly, really, really good, man. I really recommend you check it out. B movie, Lust and Sound in West Berlin, 1979 to 1989 by Mark Reeder. You can find it in loads of places. Obviously, if you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. But definitely check it out. It's definitely highly recommended. Okay, what else do we have here to talk about? Maybe one more and then we'll bounce. Oh yeah, let's talk about this. It looks like our pal David Dobrik is in big trouble, isn't it? Big trouble, it seems like, at the moment. This has been bubbling for a while. It seems like there's been a free-headed or three-pronged attack towards James Charles, Jeffree Star, and David Dobrik for the entirety of lockdown. It feels like at one time, it feels like you know, at one point in time, it felt like it was over for each of those gentlemen. And sometimes it isn't, right? Sometimes you think it's over for these people and they suddenly find a way to sort of rescue themselves from the pits of despair. But this time around, it feels like, unfortunately, the powers that be have decided that David Dobrik is a sacrificial lamb for everybody involved. And for the most part, you know, when you look at the allegations, it does look like he probably did what he's accused of being done. But it's a messy thing. So this is the following from BBC. David Dobrik quits app after associated accused of the R word. Of course, here it says YouTuber David Dobrik has stepped down from his app that he co-founded following the allegations from his former associate. One woman who appeared in the video on Mr. Dobrik's channel says she was R-worded, as you see there. Another person involved during the filming, Mr. Dobrik, who has almost 90 million subscribers on the platform, denies any wrongdoing, but the claim has led brands and investors to sever ties with the influencer. Mr. Dobrik rose to fame through prank videos, sometimes in collaboration with a number of other YouTubers called the Vlog Squad. During the coronavirus pandemic, he stepped back from posting regularly on YouTuber in order to launch his own photo app, Dispo. A recent investigation published by Kat Tenberg at the business news website called The Insider detailed the woman's account of the R word in 2018 by a now former Vlog Squad member. So effectively he's being judged for the crimes of people he was associated with. And I guess the whole premise behind it, I've assumed, I haven't read too much into it, is the fact that he maybe orchestrated the scenarios because he's part of this weird trend on YouTube where they do these kind of elaborate pranks that aren't pranks and are pranks. They're sort of not real, or they're scripted, you know what I mean? Well, they're sort of obviously not real, but and sometimes they're scripted. And he's basically been judged in that regard off the back of it. So he didn't exactly violate the woman himself directly. It seems like he's not being accused of that. He's just being accused of sort of putting the girls, whether they're underage or of age. I'm assuming they're of age, because if it wasn't, they'll definitely say. But they're of age. He's putting them in situations that are basically allowing them to be violated in some way, shape or form. They continue to have several ties. Since the claims support the app and this Dobrik has collapsed, venture capital firm and leading investor in the app, Spark Capital, announced it would sever all ties with the company. In light of recent news of Lost Squad, the co-founder of this, but we have made a decision to sever all ties. So they're, pulling out a big amount of cash in an app like this, which was meant to be the next big thing. It's sort of like another photo sharing social media app where you essentially take these disposable image quality type pictures. The whole idea behind it is that you're meant to live in the moment, so you take a picture and you don't see it until the next day, so it allows you to kind of be most engrossed with the things around you, but you also get this memory of this time in history that you had, which occurred in 24 hours before, kind of a spin on that. It looked pretty cool at the time of me saying this. I did sign up to be a beta test user, but I didn't get through on that one, and then I signed up on a waiting list for the app to be open. And judging by all this kerfuffle that's happening, I don't think we're going to see the app available anytime soon. I don't think. It probably will eventually come out, but they're probably going to let it breathe a little bit more and maybe put out a video clearly disavowing David Dobrik and then moving forward, because they had a whole New York Times spread recently where they all dressed up in turtlenecks similar to Steve Jobs and shit, to like a college sort of like photo thing. So they're going to have to do a lot of work to sort of get this sort of smut off their name. But hey, Mr. Dobrik then announced he would step down from the board at Dispo to not distract from the company's growth. As a YouTube influencer, Dobrik made millions of dollars through the sponsorship deals. They always mention this sort of stuff. They're sort of like secretly hoping that more people pull out of him, sorry. Another one says here, HelloFresh, EA Sports, HBO Max are among other brands that dropped him the allegations. In the account published by the Insider, a woman alleged she was violated during the filming of a Vlog Squad video in 2018. She reportedly said she was given alcohol despite being under the legal age of 21 and became drunk to the point of unconsciousness. Later, she said that she was involved in a group of calls, which involved a Vlog Squad member, when she was too intoxicated to consent. Yay. The video, which does not explicitly show the alleged incident, was published on Mr. Dobrik's channel and later removed. While our client is appalled by misconduct attributed to the former member, assuming it is true, my client denies any wrongdoing, Dobrik told. The lawyer said, consent is something that's super, super important to me. Dobrik added in a recent video post on one of his YouTube channels, whether I'm shooting with a friend or I'm shooting with a stranger, I make sure every video I'm putting out, I have approval from the person. But the funny thing is, so far we're seeing all these images and videos coming out of him doing pranks that people weren't that really kosher with in the beginning. But it's a classic thing, these sort of things. Like when you're at the top, you're obviously untouchable, and people kind of want to get next to you because you have the stardust on you. I've never really been a fan of the guy. I've always hated this flipping smile thing that he does with his tongue sort of sticking out, and that annoying laugh that he has. Elaborate pranks that are all scripted. You can cut me out of that shit. Maybe it's an age thing, but I've just never given a crap about it. But it was quite clear that when he was a hot shit, no one had a bad word to say about him, apart from Trisha Paytas was the only person. But for valid reasons, people didn't really take what she had to say with any sort of weight on it, because she had her own concerns, her own issues that she was dealing with. But she'd been obviously proven right now as history has sort of progressed, or as the story has basically developed. But this is one of those classic cases where no one called out this behavior when they were standing right next to the guy. And the moment that there's a lot more allegations coming out from strangers, people that are not necessarily going to gain but people that have like maybe not much to lose from this situation decide to come out. Suddenly everyone's got a moral compass. Suddenly everyone's got ethics that they stand by. Suddenly people are now people have woken up to the fact that what they filmed with the guy or what they witnessed themselves at the moment was incorrect. And I don't really have any time for it. I hate people that kind of witness fuckery but don't say anything in the moment, and in the moment that person is sort of being kicked and flogged, and they're being stripped of all their sponsors and their livelihood, then they step in and decide to deliver the final blow. He was this behavior that he was doing was known for a while. There's archive footage that's being leaked now of vlogs from years ago that are basically showing them, either insinuating that they did something untoward or laughing in the midst of it, really doing some crazy shit that you would probably, maybe at the time was acceptable because of the nature of YouTube and what it was, but looking back on it through today's lens and how sensitive people are and how people are very prone to, the idea of how sketchy consent is in these sort of occasions, because alcohol is involved, clout is involved, all these really murky things that sort of muddy the waters. It really shouldn't be muddied, really and truly, but at that moment I can imagine a lot of that stuff could be done with you're taking advantage of groupies, you're sort of promising them clout and exposure and fame, and there's all this nasty stuff that kind of muddies the waters and kind of blurs the line between what's right and what isn't right. But in my opinion, it's pretty clear that you shouldn't be in any sort of position, number one, where you're buying alcohol for girls that are obviously underage and then filming that footage and putting it on YouTube to monetize it. That's just insane, first of all. The fact that the girls are even there in the first place is nuts, but again, they're young adults. It's not as if they're children, so it's not as if their parents can stop them from going, but we definitely have to be we definitely have to progress in culture where maybe the idea that a girl will travel to another state to go hang out with a YouTuber and drink loads of alcohol in a hotel room and film content maybe isn't the best of ideas. But again, hey, we are where we are. But still, in that sense, there should be a sense that, because part of me thinks the big problem with this sort of stuff, it's always like the person that's being filmed is the butt of the jokes. It's not as like everybody's in the joke. That's kind of the issue that I have with all this stuff. It's like, if you're going to go around and do a prank channel, at least make everyone have a good time. It feels like everything is done at the expense of the ladies or the young girls that are going there to meet the guy, right? They're going there to meet their hero. Their guard is down. They may be manipulated, whatever's happening, right? It's the fact that they're not even trying to make it a good experience. Everyone's walking away from this feeling a bit yucky, feeling violated, right? Feeling like they're taken advantage of. And that's the one thing that I don't actually get, because for the most part, all these people that are going there, with the exception of a few, clout chasers, everyone's a fan. Diehard fans, right? People that would legitimately, give this creator their last dollar if they had it, to support them, even though they shouldn't. But the sort of fanatical fans that are gonna be riding for you, come rain or shine. So when these guys take advantage of their own fans this way, that's when I kind of get a bit like, you know what? It is what it is. If the game decides to kind of take everything away from you, it is what it is. You violated number one rule, which is to never take advantage of your fans, and now you're in this crappy position, and he probably got too high on his own supply, thought he was untouchable, started to get reckless, started to take too many risks with his content. And again, like similar to Twitter, right? I'll just assume there's certain content now look through nowadays lens, the same way how people look back at cowboy movies and the way that women and minorities were treated and think, right, you could never make a movie like that now. Even movies made in the early 2000s, you look through it, through the prism and through the lens of today's culture, you just can't get away with that sort of stuff. So imagine what it must have been like in the, 5 years ago in terms of the prank, culture that exists on YouTube and shit. You can't get away with that sort of stuff now at the moment. It just doesn't run anymore. It's not funny. It's not interesting. People are going to get called out from it. You'll lose a lot of things going forward. And it just is what it is, and he is in this position mostly down to his own error here. Of course, here's an article here from The Verge. YouTuber David Dobrik parts ways with disposable camera app. In the midst of it, the app as well itself looked pretty cool, I thought, in itself, in terms of how it operates. The idea is fairly novel, right? Even though I think there's a few apps in the App Store that do similar sort of thing, that allow you to kind of take free 35mm-esque sort of pictures. The idea that you had to develop it over time and you see the next day was pretty cool. They have a pretty cool merch store that they have here too, with some nice little items. They post some interesting stuff on Twitter and Wallaki, but again, all fucked up due to some reckless behavior from the group that he was involved in. And I think there's some comments actually from the fans themselves that really give you an idea as to how conflicted everybody is with the story, because for the most part, from what I read also, again, maybe at the time of recording, it seems like he didn't do anything directly, but he kind of, I guess, profited and maybe orchestrated the scenarios that led to people getting taken advantage of. And this is a post here of him, of the ad of itself for Dispo. That's obviously, you can view here on his Twitter profile. Let's mute it because it's obviously got music on it. It's kind of a well done sort of trailer for the app itself. He's got the makeup on to make him look very old, I guess, remembering fondly the moments that are captured on the app itself. Pretty well done. And in the comments below, they've got all these accounts, screenshots of, people, basically sharing some of the experience. I think it alleges looks like it's an image or a screenshot of somebody sharing their experience with David directly that he then replies to and says, sorry. It was at the end, okay, I respect your wishes. The video is down. It's the tweet says, this is a text message for all you who are defending him. Remember, just because he does stuff in front of a camera doesn't mean you know him in real life. He could be put in the face of a brand. He also don't bash the victim. It was scary enough to come out for them. The cloud's defending him right now. The insider article out and the receipts are as well. How the F are you still denying this? You can't still think you're right or good person. Making a video called Let's Talk and turning off the comments is not talking. Trust me when I say this isn't going to age well. It's him obviously laughing. I think it's a threesome clip, right?
I'm just had a threesome and I think we're all going to jail.
It's hard to take stuff like that, at face value, I guess, because it maybe stuff said as a joke between friends. But when you then marry it up with that article and what people are alleging and the evidence on video, that's the thing as well. A lot of this stuff is them just telling on themselves. There's so much like risky, questionable bits of content that involves young girls that you're like, oh, this is a bit odd. Luckily, it's all girls that are overage. If it wasn't, this would be a whole lot of a different situation. More tweets here. David titled the video Let's Talk. Chloe disabled the comment. That's due to his apology video that he put out. Suddenly into grandpas. Somebody being a little bit risky with their comment. Mad things in it, but so far it looks like it's over for the lad. The app Dispo itself is out. A little bit of an article here from Mashable. And again, man, I don't know. I wonder if we just live in a culture nowadays where maybe the idea of having groupies just isn't, I won't say having groupies isn't not conducive to modern day life at the moment. It just isn't, especially when you consider, when you read accounts of what actually groupies got up to. You read the Keith Richards autobiography, Steven Tyler autobiography from Aerosmith. You see, as kind of maybe, you see how vital they were in the scene and in the culture in terms of, great artists and, subcultures and movements and stuff, right? They played an active role in terms of, the rise and fall of certain bands and shows, inspired songs and many things, groupies at that time. And I think maybe now the idea of what a groupie is has sort of changed, maybe because of the demographic and what's kind of acceptable. Because again, you have to imagine back then as well, it wasn't as if these rock stars were only getting together or hooking up with ladies that happened to be the same age as them. It wasn't the case. Some of the people that involved in there were underage at that time, and it wasn't, it was kind of a thing that people just did. Maybe nowadays we just past that and we sort of moved on, and we just have to kind of accept the fact. And if you're somebody of note, you just can't get yourself in the position where that is ever the case, because you never know what's going to happen a few years later down the line, how culture may change and how things might look different. But I think at the heart of all this, personally, again, similar to the Crystal Lear situation, regardless of what you think of the story itself and who's right, who's wrong, at the heart of this, what I think is the issue is a lack of respect. I think the fact that these guys don't show these girls that come out and meet them, even if they do want to actively sleep with them and hook up or whatever it may be, any bit of respect and show them an actual good time and make them feel good and just provide a fun a day out for them in general is what leads to what it leads to, right? The desire to maybe film viral content, which kind of, it feels like, again, that they're not into the joke. They just kind of want to make the joke at that person's expense, is what leads to the situations. They're not treating their fans with any sort of level of respect, any sort of decency, and it sort of leaves the stuff up to open interpretation. Because imagine if you're a young girl and you're going to meet these people who you think are your heroes, it might be confusing coming back. Even though you actively, willingly went there with the idea of sleeping or hooking up with one of the members or one of the Vlog Squad guys, it could definitely make you feel a little bit confused when you leave and you feel like, hold on, was I put in a position where I was coerced? Was I purposely given drugs and alcohol in order to get me in a position where I maybe acquiesce a little bit more? What actually happened there? Even though you went there with the sole intention to do whatever you need to do, the fact that these guys didn't treat you with any sort of respect, didn't sort of try and want to show you a good time, just wanted to get the viral content out there, get their pee-pees wet and whatnot, it sort of leads into this really murky place that we're in now at the moment, where he's effectively being, tried for the crimes of somebody else involved in the crew. Now, don't get me wrong, he's got a lot of responsibility. He has a camera, he's a grown-up, but also malarkey. He's putting the content together, he's highlighting in a certain way, he's orchestrating maybe the whole scenarios, but it's just wild that all of this could be avoided. These guys were less dicks, right? If these guys were just treat the girls with more respect, this could be avoided instantly, but they don't. And I guess maybe that's the difference between the groupies of old and groupies of now, is maybe more so, less with the groupies and more so with the actual artist and the kind of figureheads involved. They don't actually treat them with respect. They don't treat them with any sort of reverence that they're meant to be treated with, which is really odd when you consider that they're going to be your evangelists, they're going to be your sort of advocates when you're not around, right? You show some of those girls a good time, they're going to be the ones that are going to be singing your praises, until they're flipping grey in hair. Do you know what I mean? They're going to be your fans for life, but instead you say what you want to say here. It goes back to their small town. Scenes are small. The word travels around that so-and-so's a creep, so-and-so's a rapist, so-and-so does this, so-and-so's an abuser, and all of a sudden the entire narrative around your group changes and it's a whole different affair. And I think that's essentially what ended up happening with this in this regards. Again, unfortunate, considering their place in YouTube history and all that sort of stuff and law, but again, I'm not surprised. The guy's always had an annoying face to me. It looks, that cackle, the giving away the cars thing is always, you always have to question people that are like excessive with that sort of stuff. There's definitely something that they're hiding. I don't know what it is, but those sort of like rambunctious acts of sort of charity, especially that sort of stuff like cars and whatnot, it feels a little bit odd. In terms of me, it feels like you're buying friends. It's like you're buying silence. I don't know, it just feels a bit odd. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but again, I think it's a wrap for David Dobrik, unfortunately. So that's the end of the Agostinho Show, episode number 441. Thanks so much for tuning in as per usual. It's been a pleasure to have your company. If it's your first time checking out the show via YouTube, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, leave me a comment down below. If you're listening via the podcast app, please leave me a 5-star review. That'll be greatly appreciated. And of course, if you want to join the Patreon, support it, you get 2 bonus shows there per week. Sign on at patreon.com/Agostinho. That's patreon.com/Agostinho to get involved on there today. Until then, take care, be safe, peace.